By 1942, the German army faced a simple problem of logistics. Their heaviest tank, the Panzerkampfwagen 6, otherwise popularly known as the Tiger-1, weighed nearly 60 tons. Moving such a vehicle over long distances by road risked mechanical breakdowns and consumed enormous amounts of fuel. The Deutsche Reichsbahn, working with industry, introduced the SSyms 80-ton 6-axle flat car, known officially as Schwere Plattformwagen Type 2, with a deck length of just under 12 meters and a load limit of 80 tons. The wagon was purpose-built for Tigers and other super heavy loads. Each rested on two 6-axle bogies, distributing the tank's weight evenly across the track. Loading a Tiger for transport was not as simple as driving it aboard. The tank's combat tracks at 725 millimeters wide made it too broad for Germany's standard rail loading gauge. Crews removed the outer row of road wheels and fitted special 520 millimeter Wehrladketten, otherwise known as transport tracks. This reduced the overall width to just over 3.1 meters, barely within regulation. The turret was rotated to the rear, the long 88mm gun depressed and secured, keeping the silhouette as compact as possible. Alright, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're tackling something a little different. Trumpeter's 1/35 scale Schwere Plattformwagen SSyms 80. At first glance, it might seem like a straightforward kit, but it's surprisingly complete. And it's one I've wanted to build for a long time. Back in the mid-1990s, when I returned to the hobby, I would pore over my Tiger reference books. Time and again, I'd see those Tigers sitting high on their heavy rail cars, and I thought to myself, what a perfect way to display a tank. After many years of thinking about it, I finally pulled the trigger on this kit. Inside the box, you get several sprues, many of them doubled, along with a clear instruction sheet, decals, and even a color painting guide. I didn't follow that guide too closely, but the drawings and the instructions are clear, simple, and easy to work from. Trumpeter provides a pre-molded strip of terrain that includes basalt rock and cutouts for the railway ties. It's surrounded by a neat frame, which I later had to fill sand and paint to get it looking just right. I'll admit, I jumped in with both feet, thinking this would be straightforward. As it turned out, the spacing of the ties in some areas wasn't quite right. And I only discovered that after I'd started. It was an easy fix in the end, but if I were to do it again, I'd definitely approach the build a little differently. You can see here that the spacing for the ties is not correct. I kind of just jumped in without even looking at the instructions because I figured I knew best, but obviously...
Which is number one, wrong.
The technical backbone of Germany's wartime railway was not just the gauge of the rails, but the way the track was laid, connected, and managed across the Reich and into occupied Europe. At its simplest, the railway is two rails on wooden sleepers, but in war it became a living network. And every junction yard and siding tells the story of how an army breathes. Germany's home network was built to standard gauge, 1,435 millimeters between rails, and it was engineered for high density with double-tracked main lines radiating from Berlin and the Ruhr to every frontier. These truck routes were flanked by passing loops, marshalling yards, and junction complexes that allowed dispatchers to feed a continuous stream of trains forward. In practice, the German system ran like a circulatory system. Coal from Silesia, steel from the Ruhr, tanks from the factories, and men from the barracks, all merging into single-track spines near the front. The art was to keep those arteries clear, and the key was careful layout. At every major junction stood classification yards where freight was broken up and reassembled. These yards were built into ladder tracks and in some cases hump profiles where wagons could be pushed up a gentle incline and then rolled down by gravity into the proper siding. Switch tenders and retarders controlled speed, sorting trains into blocks bound for the same destination. Without these yards, the Reichsbahn would have collapsed under its own weight. They were the pressure valves of the system, absorbing incoming chaos and spitting out order. Closer to the fighting fronts, the layouts became leaner and more improvised. Lines were often single-tracked, so engineers built long passing sidings where eastbound and westbound trains could meet, wait, and then thread past each other. The length of those sidings dictated the length of the trains, which in turn dictated how much coal, ammunition, or fuel could reach the front in a single movement. A short siding meant shorter trains, more dispatches, and heavier strain on the locomotives and crew. On the Eastern Front, the layout problem was compounded by gauge. Soviet broad gauge lines were not simply too wide for German wheels. Their switches, crossing, and yards were all built on that wider geometry. Conversion meant more than moving one rail inward. Every turnout had to be rebuilt, every crossing frog reshaped, and every yard ladder relayed to keep spacing correct. The longer the yard, the more rails had to be lifted and reset. The German engineers learned that a knot of sidings could take as much effort to convert as 100 kilometers of straight main line. Yet without those sidings, the line was useless because the train needs yards to be assembled, serviced, and dispatched. Bombing and sabotage added another layer. A marshalling yard was a tempting target because one bomb could crumple switches and crossings where dozens of lines converged. Repair crews carried prefabricated track panels, sometimes 10 or 12 meters long, that could be dropped in overnight to patch craters. They also kept portable turnouts ready, lifting in a new switch to restore yard functionality. Temporary bypass loops were common, curling around a destroyed section to keep traffic moving, even if at reduced capacity. Track geometry itself became a matter of strategy. Heavy military trains demanded strong rail sections, dense sleepers, and deep ballast. On secondary lines where track was lighter, locomotives had to run at reduced speeds to avoid spreading the rails or sinking into the roadbed.
What the?
It was at this juncture that I noticed I had completely screwed up.
Okay, that didn't work.
Engineers reinforced critical lines with heavier rails, bolstered embankments, and in some cases laid second tracks where bottlenecks proved intolerable. The war was fought not just with men and guns, but with tons of stone ballast and the angles of switch geometry. By late in the war, as Allied bombers hammered yards and bridges, layouts grew more fragmented. Dispatchers rerouted trains through minor lines never designed for such traffic, overloading fragile tracks and narrow sidings. Emergency connections were spliced into the network, creating awkward curves and sharp turnouts that slowed movement and wore down wheels and rails alike. The grand geometry of pre-war Germany, broad double tracks, elegant junctions, orderly yards, gave way to a patchwork of expedients. Yet even in this decline, the railway showed its resilience, with men laboring day and night to keep at least one line open, one siding clear, one junction patched enough to let the trains roll through. In the end, the technical story of the German track layouts in the Second World War is a story of geometry under fire. Yards that once sorted goods for peacetime trade became hubs of military traffic. Passing loops dictated the length of trains and the scale of battles they could support. Switches, crossings, and gauges were as decisive as any battlefield because without them, the steel flow of war would simply stop. It was in the lines of the track, in the length of the sidings, and in the sweep of the yards that the war on rails was truly fought.
So this is a bit of a pain in the butt putting these in. You gotta be careful you don't break off the nails or whatever these things are. I've broken a few of them off. I'll have to come back later and fix that. Maybe sanding the underneath part a little thinner might help too. So, let's try and move here. Yeah, that really helped actually. It seems to have helped.
SSyms 80 was one of the heaviest railway platforms ever fielded by Germany during the Second World War. Designed with a singular purpose to carry the massive weight of the armored vehicles that increasingly define the battlefields of Europe. By 1942, the Wehrmacht's armored division had outgrown the capacity of earlier flat cars. The new generation of tanks, such as Panthers and Tigers and their derivatives, push the boundaries of transport logistics. To move them efficiently, the Deutsche Reichsbahn developed specialized six-axle cars like the SSyms 80, rated to hold up to 80 tons. The task was daunting. A Tiger 1 weighed nearly 60 tons, and the later Tiger 2 pushed 70. Road marches were impractical over long distances, not only because of fuel shortages and mechanical wear, but also because such machines destroyed the very roads beneath them. Railways were the arteries of the German war effort, and armored trains of SSyms cars became the lifeline that delivered tanks from the factories of Kessel, Henschel, and Krupp to the staging grounds at the front. Each platform was built of riveted steel beams with a deck low slung between the bogies to keep the load center of gravity stable. To secure the tanks, crews used a system of heavy chains, wooden chocks, and steel clamps. At railheads close to the front, loading ramps were set up so that tanks could drive directly onto the cars. Sometimes a series of earth embankments or prefabricated steel ramps were used. The sight of an entire train of SSyms platforms, each with a Tiger or Panther chained down, became a symbol of both German industrial might and its dependency on railways. The Reichsbahn's track network was strained by this duty. The immense axle loads required reinforced rails, basalt ballast, and carefully aligned wooden and concrete sleepers to distribute the weight. Crews monitored the track constantly, for the pounding of heavy transports could twist rails and loosen fastenings. Begin by taking part A1 and fitting 4 A15 bearing caps into place. Next, attach 6 of the suspension arms, A2, to the main frame. Build 12 spring units by combining A14 with A8, then set them onto the bogie housings. For the wheels, join parts A9 and A22 to form 12 wheel halves, and mount them in the pairs on 6 axles, part A18. Finally, assemble 12 bearing housings using A16 and A13, completing the wheel and suspension system for this SSyms flat car model kit. Make 12 of these, and make 6 of those. Despite the demands, trains and armor continued to roll east towards Russia, south into Italy and the Balkans, and west towards the Atlantic Wall, wherever armored strength was needed. The SSyms 80 was not just a wagon, it was an integral part of the armored spearhead. Without it, the Tigers and Panthers might never have reached the battlefield in fighting condition. Yet this reliance on rail also revealed a weakness. Allied bombers targeted marshalling yards and bridges, knowing that immobilized armor was as good as destroyed. By 1944, as rail lines were shattered and locomotives grew scarce, the once reliable flow of tanks by SSyms platform slowed to a trickle. The very system that had enabled Germany's armored warfare became a bottleneck in its final years. Still, the engineering of the SSyms 80 speaks volumes about the logistical challenges of modern war. It was a tool born of necessity, a bridge between factory and battlefield, a steel cradle that bore the weight of Germany's heaviest weapons. In its silence and strength, the platform embodied the unseen effort behind every armored assault, carrying the war on rails across a continent. When we speak of the SSyms 80, it is easy to focus on the massive deck, where Tigers and Panthers sat, but its true strength lay beneath, in the bogie wheels and the running gear that bore the tremendous weight. Each SSyms platform rode on a pair of 3-axle bogies, 6 wheels to each end, 12 wheels in total. This arrangement was no accident. The engineers of the Deutsche Reichsbahn, together with firms like Mann and Link Hoffmann Busch, understood that distributing the 80-ton load required not only heavy steel girders in the frame, but precision-designed bogies capable of spreading weight across the rails without crushing them. The bogie frames were constructed from deep-pressed steel sections, riveted and welded in factory jigs that held every angle true. The wheel sets, solid rolled steel wheels pressed onto forged axles, were machined to exact tolerances. Their treads hardened by heat treatment to resist the grinding loads of armor-laden trains. Bearings were of the plain journal type, seated in heavy cast steel axle boxes lined with bronze, kept cool and lubricated by woolen pads soaked in oil. Factory workers installed dust covers and retaining wedges to keep contaminants out, for the life of a bearing under 80 tons depended on such details. Each bogie incorporated a system of equalizing beams and leaf springs. These weren't crude farm wagon springs, but carefully calculated laminations of spring steel, forged, tempered, and assembled under strict inspection. They flexed just enough to absorb unevenness in the track, allowing the load above to remain steady even as the wheels below rode across joints, ballast, and sleepers. The equalizers spread the weight across all 3 axles, ensuring that no single wheel bore the brunt, and thus avoiding catastrophic rail damage. The completed bogies emerged from the factory floor in a state of dark primed steel, every bearing freshly packed, every spring stack tested under load. They were rolled under the waiting deck of an SSyms 80, where massive kingpins and bolster plates locked them into place. Workers used hydraulic jacks and gantries to set the car body onto its bogies, then tested the assembly on short factory tracks before delivery to the Reichsbahn. What resulted was a marriage of brute force and precision. Each wheel, each bearing, each spring was a piece of a larger equation, one that allowed 80 tons of fighting steel to glide across rails of basalt-set sleepers. Without these bogies, the SSyms was just a steel platform. With them, it became a rolling bridge between German factories and the front lines of Europe.
All right, look at this. Really bad. Got to fill every one of these. That is a pain.
Okay, I've given these things a second pass. And this one still needs a little bit more. By the way, this is acetone that I'm using with the Tamiya putty. And it thins it out pretty good. So I'll come back and sand this stuff after it's set up for a long time, because if I try and sand it right away, it just makes a mess. Like, I really should just let it dry for a whole day at least. All right, let's take a look at this and this. So A16. So some of you may have noticed this is not one of those super expensive glass files or any of those other hobbyist targeted sanding sticks. This is from London Drugs or any drugstore, and it's like in the beauty section, and it's like $3 or something. And it does the same job. It's got a rough side and a softer side. So, you know, you want to spend all this money on name brand stuff just because that's what seems to be the right thing. I don't do that. I usually use what works and what saves me money. So anyways, I got to clean up 12 of these. I got to make 12 of these setups where I take this part A13, and I'm gluing it onto part A16, like that. Quite a bit of a molding issue where it's sunken in there, from when it cools. Fortunately, that's not a big issue because it most likely won't be seen. I could fill it, but I'm not going to bother. So there is a bit of a clue which way this goes up or down. There's one pin that's bigger and one pin that's smaller. See, like it goes on no problem that way, but it doesn't go on that way, you see? So that'll help guys like me out. Just put a little bit there. Hey, Mr. Keith, hey, how's it going? How's that that dragon wagon coming? Wow, looks great. You gonna do a fair amount of weathering on that, or? Oh well. So here is a fine sponge type sanding pad. And it's been a couple of hours. I'm going to see if it will work right now. So that looks like it's going to work. So these steel wheels, that's how Krupp made his fortune, is making steel wheels for the American train system with his steel before World War II. So I've kind of like trying this out where I've put the wheel on a thing, and then I can run it on my drill. Maybe save myself some issues. Where did that go? like that. I think I'm going to keep doing that. So I think I've got that problem solved. I'll be able to tell more when I put it under some primer. So maybe that's what I'll do right now. All right, so let's move on to this part where we have these spring parts. And these leaf springs need to get these little parts added to them, and there's 12 of those. So A8 and A14. Well, this is just one coat of that Mr. Surfacer 1000. I'm going to give it another shot because you can still see those knockout marks. But the next thing I'm going to do as well, now that I've cleaned all these springs up, is I'm going to take out A1 and attach everything that I made before. Also A15 is included in that. So we've got this part to clean up. There's quite a bit of a mold seam that needs to get scraped back if you want. And then there's the attachment points. So this is with 2 coats of that Mr. Surfacer spray balm. And it looks like I can still make out those knockout marks. I may try and sand back everything again, or I may just give it another coat. All right, well, before I can do this step, I'm gonna have to make sure these wheels are perfect. But we can make 4 of these and make 4 of these. Assemble the cross beams by joining A3, A5, A7, and A20, making 4 units. Repeat the process with parts A19, C10, C17, and A5 to build another 4. With the wheel sets complete, fit each axle and wheel pair into place, securing them to the suspension beams. Attach the completed cross beams across the bogie frame, locking the wheels firmly in place. Build 2 full bogie assemblies in total for the SSyms flat car. So when I put these wheels into where they go into the body of this, you can't really see much of that anyway, but I want to have them perfect in any case. But yeah, a lot of that is hidden. All right, time to tackle these a little bit boring subject, but gotta be done. So these are the A20. Here's the A3. And then you have this that goes in between. So let's see, just as a dry fit here. So A3 goes here. You know, I didn't even need to use glue, it just goes right in. So I'm going to clean these all up. They all have pretty massive attachment points. All right, I'll be back. There's knockout marks here, but I'm not going to bother with those. No one will ever look underneath this. I'm going to try using this instead of cutting it with a knife. Use my Fordham.
All right, well, I got 3 more of those to make.
Ah!
All right, well, here's the other more simpler brake pads. Kind of came up with a way of doing it where I glue these in and then I bend that part in. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those and 4 of these. I think what you can do is glue in one side.
Okay, everybody, we're going to wrap this one up here, and we'll be back with part 2 in the foreseeable future. In the meantime, and in between time, that's another edition of Jet Scale Models. Y'all come back now, you hear?